the hallmark or the unifying factor of any post-structural or deconstructionist concept would be that they frown upon meaning. One kind of singular meaning that comes from a text. That their meaning is always going to be multidirectional. But because meaning itself cannot be very abstract, it really needs some kind of center to hold, because we still haven't broken out of the center periphery binary like the deconstructionists wanted us to do, but we haven't been able to. So because of that, they're always going to say कि oh, meaning है, लेकिन meaning जो है वो काफी fragmented है. ठीक है. Meaning is very fragmented, meaning is very abstracted, meaning exists across all of these blocks of text. Meaning is there, but there might not be there might not be like a very cemented or a very coherent connection between these different blocks of texts. There might not be a very cemented notion of meaning in these blocks of text. We are used to reading chapters which follow one another. But followability does not say anything about it. It just says, after one word, there will be another word. After one narrative, there will be another narrative. After one example, there will be another example. And that is how narratives work. That narratives work through a following of words, of sentences, of events. But never does it say that those words will need to be together. Right. So if we take the example of maybe say James Joyce or any, for example, even if we take the example of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, we will see that events follow each other, but without any kind of concrete connection that can be deciphered. You will think कि क्या लिखा है ये? There is no connection, but that is the point of those narratives. Right, key narratives exist in followability. They not always exist. They do not always exist with a clear, concise, very simplified or singular meaning. Okay, let's remember this when we're trying to do hypertexts. Any other question?
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other question? Okay. So I understand that from last time we were talking about linearity and morality and how these things are supposed to be together, but not a lot of you understood the connection between linearity and morality, even though we spent some time over it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some more time with this thing today, because if you don't understand this, it's going to be very difficult to explain it. Explain the other parts of the section. So we'll spend some time on it. That's okay. I really want you to see and understand before we proceed. Okay. So I have made this table for you guys, and we will focus on the table, like the first aspect of this table first. So remember, what is Landau arguing? He is arguing that morality is expressed through the social function. ठीक है, morality is what? Morality पिछली बार भी हमने बात की थी. Morality is, according to, I'll go back to the previous slide. Morality develops from linearity, unity, coherence of a fixed text, where is White was saying that morality depends upon unity, and only by relating narrative to social function can we realize the impulse to morality. And then does liberation from morality, reduction of linearity go hand in hand? So last time when I asked you about what morality is, somebody answered that morality is our social norms, morality is our social customs, and I agreed that like in our history, sometimes it was considered to be completely moral for women to cover their bodies and walk around, because we see examples like this in Victorian England. We see examples like this in our own country, right? So it is morality is an ever-shifting series of principles that a society tries to live by, and those principles are always changing, always in flux. Why are they always in flux? Because people and their thinking is always in flux, right? So morality of a particular generation or of a particular time might not be the morality that we experience today. Right. So due to different movements, due to different modes of thinking, morality keeps on changing. So the first assertion that Landau is making, and that all of you agreed with, was that morality is an expression of what our society thinks. It is an expression of the social function. That is the first part of the statement, that morality is expressed in social function. Right. Now the second part is that it goes with reality. Now, obviously, this is a very simple point to make, that morality, because it is expressed in our social function. When I say social function, it's just a phrase, don't be scared of it. What social function basically means is society or societal thinking. So when I say that societal thinking creates morality, right? Yeah, morality is expressed in societal thinking. Na, it's a cycle. So both of them influence the other. What am I really saying? Ki, the morality of a certain time will obviously reflect the reality of that time. Right. Will obviously reflect the reality of that time. No, obviously, see, morality is what Hamisha there are always, and I remember I did subcultures with you last semester. So subcultures में हमने क्या पढ़ा था कि there is always a dominant culture, there is always a subculture or subversive culture. So the dominant culture tries to assert its dominance through hegemony, through its principles, and everybody it makes everybody want to follow that culture. That is the thing. Na? That is the dominant culture. So now there are some small subcultures which also try to assert their reality, which also try to say, ki, oh, I also exist, but they don't really exist, and nobody really cares about them. Either they are taken in by the hegemony, or they exist in their own sphere, still they don't threaten the hegemony. This is what we talked about last semester, last year actually. So here bring with this point कि morality जो है वो अब what is morality is the expression of dominant thinking. Okay, the thinking which is dominant during that period of time, right? So if you take, when we go back to the example of Victorian England, we had a lot of people, we had a lot of feminists writing that women should be given autonomy, they should be given independence, or they should be given property rights, they should be given all of these things. But people weren't listening to them because those women were in small amount. They were a small amount of women who were shouting for their rights. The dominant ideology of the time was that women should cover up their bodies. There should be a restriction on the expression of female sexuality, and that is how we remember the Victorian age, as an age of restrictions. It wasn't to say that there were some, subculture, or there were some people who did not agree with this dominant morality, but morality of a generation, of a time, is always going to be the expression of the dominant reality of the time. Whatever is in dominance at that point will be expressed in that morality. So now, for example, today, in the aftermath of Me Too movements, in the aftermath of other feminist movements all over the world, we have a growing inclination to think about feminism, to think about the position of women in our society, in the world. And so now this expresses a dominant part of our society today, right? So these two modes are always clashing with each other. This is why I said that morality is always changing, and morality is usually the expression of dominant thinking in that society. Therefore, because it is the expression of dominant thinking, it goes with reality. And reality here is in quotation marks, because again, as I expressed, what might be real for you, what might be a real concern to you, might not be a real concern shared by the dominant morality of that time. Or what might seem a very trivial concern to you, right? Like wearing, clothes that cover every part of your body. This might not be a very big concern for you, but it is a very big concern for the moral police in our society. Again, this problem with between concerns, something which is important to you might not be important to others. That is how reality is expressed, because reality is different for everybody. This is where reality is in quotation marks. So abhi ke liye we've understood that morality is an expression of social function, and because it is the dominant expression of that social function, it is the dominant reality that is expressing. Therefore, morality can be connected to the reality. Now, why is he saying that it comes out in linearity? Why is he saying that? Where is this connection coming from? And we are going to take a look at that. See, I want to tell you, multilinear narratives. When did multilinear narratives come into being? Multilinear narratives came into being majorly after the deconstruction era, after the post-structural era, in the digital age, right? That is what we've been learning from day one, from like the past 2 weeks, that hypertexts are multilinear. Hypertext came with the digital age. They came in the last 40-50 years, right? Correct? You all agree with this? Usse pehle, what kind of narratives were there? What kind of narratives were our people writing? What kind of narratives were they? They were the Aristotelian narratives that we talked about. What is one thing that we talked about in the Aristotelian phase of our discussion? That every narrative needs to have a clear beginning, clear middle, and clear end. That is what we talked about. Clear beginning, middle, and end. What is a clear beginning, middle, and end? It is an expression of a linear form, right? You go from the beginning, you go to the middle, then you go to the end. It moves in one direction. If it moves in one direction, if it's unidirectional, then it is an expression of linearity. That is the point Landau is trying to make, that because before hypertextuality came, before the digital age created multilinear narratives, all narratives were more or less, all narratives more or less. I'm not making a blanket generalization. I am saying that a majority of narratives of these times followed Aristotle's concepts, followed his concept of a beginning, middle, and end, and because of that, they were all linear narratives. This is why he's saying that social function is an expression of linearity. This is point number one, why morality and linearity are connected. Point number two is that, we'll go back to the previous slide. Point number two is White says, so White, a critic that he's talking about, he says that morality depends on unity, and unity is a matter of ideology. Only by relating narrative to social function can we realize the impulse to morality. Again, we'll go back to this our earlier statement. If morality develops from linearity, unity and coherence of a fixed linear text, how can hypertext fiction be moral, or will it be forever trivial? So leave this thing. Now I am trying to explain the connection between unity, ideology, and social function. We'll go back to this chart. Now, in this chart, what we're talking about is ki how I've explained one reason कि linearity और social function के बीच में और morality के बीच में क्या relationship था. That is because in the pre-digital era, all narratives were usually written in a linear form, usually followed Aristotle. Because they followed Aristotle, they had a clear beginning, middle, and end. Because they had a clear beginning, middle, and end, they were linear narratives. Because they were linear narratives, they could express the social function of the time. Now, the second statement that I'm going to make is that you must have heard in your study of literature in these 2 years, or you must have read it somewhere, that literature is usually a mirror of the society. Right, literature is usually a mirror of the society. Now, when you look at that mirror, when you look at the image in the mirror, society, how does a society usually present itself? A society will always present itself as a coherent unit. Humans are very fond of organization. We are very fond of combining things, of categorizing things, of labeling things, of making sure that they are grouped in different categories. They have different. They are grouped together according to the characteristics that they share. This is a thing that we've discussed also, how that a lot of our literature is divided across different genres, divided across different canons, divided according to, it is categorized on the basis of many different things, whether women wrote it, whether men wrote it, when was it written, how was it written, what are the characters like. So we have different kind of categories based on different kind of literature. Okay, so what are these different kind of categories? What are they trying to do? There is a lot of literature, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to organize it. They're trying to create a unity out of it. Right. Now, this unity is a reflection of how a society perceives itself. Nowhere will you find an individual, or nowhere will you find a society which is trying to express itself in a very disjointed manner. We are always going to look for a unified meaning. We are always going to create unified meaning out of history. Right. So even if you look at history or philosophy, which we are going to look at in the next slide, he is going to say that history and philosophy and other things like science, or even religion, they have always tried to create one explanation. They've always tried to give you one coherent meaning, one unified meaning, that this is how things are. For example, the Bible insists that this is how the world was created. Hindus insist on their version of events, and scientists insist on their Big Bang Theory version of events. So everybody is trying to give you one coherent meaning, one kind of answer which solves all problems. This is something that Landau has a problem with. He says that linearity and unity go hand in hand. Linearity is also fixed, unity is also fixed. That is the connecting point between these two things. The linearity, because it has a clear beginning, middle, and end, because it moves in one direction, it cannot go here, it cannot go there, it can only go in this direction, beginning, middle, end. Therefore, it is fixed. There can be no changes. You can't just read from the middle. You can't just begin at the end. No, you'll have to start at the beginning. There is only one starting point. There is only one meaning. So in that sense, a linear narrative is a fixed narrative. On the other hand, a society, when it is trying to express itself, when it's trying to tell you about its morality, what kind of thinking it has, it is going to present a unified form to you. This is what I was talking about with dominant and subversive cultures. So in Victorian England we remember it through a uh, unified meaning, through a unified category of how Victorian England was supposed to be restrictive. Right, it was supposed to be restrictive. It is only we as critics who are trying to think, oh, there were other voices present at that time too. But if you, for example, ask a lay person, or if you ask somebody who's done, who really knows nothing about Victorian England, so what will they say? They will say, oh, yeah, Victorian England was a very restricted time. Why? Because we like to assign one meaning to a particular age. We like to assign one person. We like to assign one kind of category to a particular age. So, in that way, Landau says that linearity is fixed, morality is fixed. And how are these both fixed? Because they have a certain unity at hand, because they fall prey. They are the victims of the human search for unity. Okay, because this goes with reality. So again, going back, morality is expressed in social function. Social function जो है, it expresses a certain kind of unified reality. Again, this unified reality will come out in linearity of narrative, not only because digital narratives are a very recent thing, but also because that unity needs to be expressed in a unified form. And that unity of morality, because it needs to be expressed in a unified form, what is that unified form going to be? A linear form, right? So in that way, it creates a fixed narrative. Here, ideology, social function, social thinking mean one and the same thing, which is a way of thinking of the society, right? So don't be confused with this. Ideology, social function, social expression, social thinking, all of them just mean the one thing: social thinking. Okay, so far is this point clear? How morality, unity, and linearity are connected? Do you have any kind of questions about this? Anyone? Person who was asking in the beginning of the class. Is this clear? I think it was Asmita.
Yes, ma'am, it's clear.
Are you sure? Because I can explain it again.
Ma'am, I'll study it again, then it will be more clear. But now I've understood ki how it's connected.
Okay. Okay. The connection is important. What we're going to do is read a section. Okay, and then it will be more clear. So I want you to go to page 224 of your text, and we're going to read the second paragraph. Right? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to find your text if you want to. Okay, so we're going to begin from the fourth line. White believes the unity of successful narrative to be a matter of ideology. That's what I was telling you, that the unity of a narrative ki kis narrative ki baat kar rahe? He's talking about a fixed narrative, a linear narrative. That narrative is a matter of ideology. Ideology is what? Substitute ideology with social function. So what is he basically saying? Ki linear narratives, what I'm saying here is what he's saying. The linear narratives, okay, are expressed in social function, and social function is expressed through linear narratives. Okay, believes the unity of successful narrative to be a matter of ideology, and he quotes and he's writing, narrativity certainly in factual storytelling, probably also in fictional storytelling. So he says ki in fiction as well as in non-fictional, narrativity is intimately related to the impulse to moralize reality, that is to identify it with a social system that is the source of any morality we can imagine. Again, what is he saying? Ki the impulse of narrativity, the impulse of creating a fixed narrative is where does it come from? It is linked to our impulse to unify, to create a fixed narrative out of our morality. So that is the problem here. The core problem that deconstructionists have, that Landau has, is our love for unity, our love to unify things, our love to organize things. That is what we have identified as a big problem of the constructionist era or of the structuralist era. And this is what he is going to, destroy, dhire dhire. Writing as a historian and historiographer, White argues that such ideological pressure appears with particular clarity in the value attached to narrativity in the representation of real events. This value is what? Morality. Since that value discloses a desire to endow real events with a necessarily imaginary, remember this is very critically important line that I'm reading out, with a necessarily imaginary coherence, integrity, fullness, and closure, possibly only in fiction. Right. So understand the importance of these lines. This is what I'm saying here, and what he's also saying is the same thing. That reality is a very messy thing. If you look at your lives, if you look at the lives of other people who've lived around you, they are rarely black and white. They are not like Bollywood movies. They're not like the fiction that we read. Our lives are usually lived in shades of gray. Right. Nothing is completely good. Nothing is completely bad. Everything seems to be one huge complicated mess. But that is not how we see life represented in fiction or in movies or in any kind of media that you follow. Narratives in these fictional texts are usually very straightforward. Right, the romantic stories are very straightforward. Guy meets girl, fall in love, they have a fight, then they make up, and then they go get married and live happily ever after. This rarely happens. Look at your own lives. You have considerable experience. You've been here for almost 2 decades. Now look at your lives and look at these lives. Very different kind of lives, because lives are rarely unified. Lives can really be categorized into black and white areas. This is why we want to categorize them, and that impulse to categorize them, that impulse to create an imaginary coherence, to create an imaginary integrity, comes out in fiction. Okay, comes out how we classify societies, in how we create fiction, in how we classify that. So आगे बढ़ते हैं. The very notion that sequences of real events possess the formal attributes of stories we tell about imaginary events insists why it could only have its origins in wishes, daydreams, and reveries. This is what he is trying to say. What is fiction basically, or what is a fictional expression of our consciousness? It is an expression of how we want to see things, how we wish things were, how we wish that romance was as uncomplicated as we see in a Shah Rukh Khan movie, or how we wish that adventure was as uncomplicated as we see in Ye Jawani Hai Diwani, or any other kind of adventure movie that you like. Right. So we wish for things to be uncomplicated, but they rarely are. And because we wish for them to be uncomplicated, we impose a unity on them. Because we impose that unity on them, the only outcome is a fixed experience, which can be only interpreted in one way, which can only give you one meaning, because that is what we really like. Let's read. Come to the third line after this. One could inquire if it is a good or bad that linear narratives inevitably embody some morality or ideology, but first one should determine if rejecting linearity necessarily involves rejecting morality. Now we come to the second phase of Landau's argument. I want to know if you have any questions till this point. Any comments to make? Any movie you want to compare? Okay, going to move on. What is the second phase of this argument? This is an argument that Landau has made, and he stops there. Now he raises a question. Is this actually true? Let's look at this slide. So then, does liberation from morality and rejection of linearity go hand in hand? This is the main question that he's asking. Highlight this for you. Right. Then does liberation from morality, matlab, does a rejection of morality and rejection of linearity go hand in hand? This is the point that he's making. If hypertextual, we have already established that hypertext narratives they reject linearity. We've discussed this a lot. The hypertext narratives, they're multilinear, they are multidirectional, they have some kind of linearity, but that linearity can never be erased. Right. So when I say that they reject linearity, I mean that they reject linearity. Overall, they reject linearity. Some kind of linearity they have, but that is something we can't escape, right? Because we live our life in a linear way. It doesn't work that way, right? So what we have agreed on is the hypertext usually reject linear narratives. So now he says that if they reject linear narratives because linearity is connected to morality in such a way, if they reject linearity, do they also reject morality? Are hypertext narratives amoral? Do they not have any morals? Do they lead you to the path of immorality? Do they like tell you to do things differently or tell you to not do things at all? Do they create anarchy? Right. Have you ever read a hypertext narrative and wanted to smash things up or say no to the government or go and protest or cause a riot? No. But have you ever also wanted to create a different kind of morality? Have you ever wanted to create a different kind of society? Also no. I don't know, but certainly I have not. So what he says is that before we decide whether hypertext narratives actually, through their rejection of linearity, actually create ideology-free horrors or ideology-free, heavens. There is a statement that he makes. Yeah, here. Huh. So Landau wants कि before we decide कि whether they reject morality or whether they don't reject morality. So before, why are you not? Yes. Landau wants the pre-hypertext forms must be examined to see whether hypertext, through its rejection of linearity, produces ideology-free miracles or ideology-free horrors. So basically, what he's trying to say here is कि we must decide, we must understand कि whether hypertextual narratives, ठीक है, through the rejection of linearity, create some kind of morality free heaven, where people are free to do anything and there are no repercussions, there are no negatives, or do they create kind of hell where because of morality, because of the lack of morality, we have people just running around in a state of anarchy, just killing each other, looting each other, looting shops or destroying property. So what kind of world does a hypertext create? Landau does not answer whether it creates miracles, whether it creates horrors. He says a lot of studies needed before we can make these kind of assumptions. And this is a question that I would also not ask you to engage in a lot, because the only point that we can agree here right now is hypertext narratives reject linearity. Because of the rejection of linearity, their relationship with morality is disturbed. I'm going to repeat this again. Because of the rejection of linearity, the relationship with morality becomes disturbed. That is the key word that you want to use here, disturbed. Okay, it is interrupted, right? Somehow it is interrupted. But whether it creates a heaven or a hell, that is still to be seen. That is a subjective thing. Let's come to Landau's argument now. He says that hypertext reject linearity, and by rejecting linearity, what do they reject? The falsification of experience. Now, stay with me. This is a critical point. थोड़ा सा घुमाने वाला point है, but you'll get it. When I said that morality it comes from an impulse to unify things, when this white person also said that not white person, Daniel White said that morality जो है मतलब morality tries to create or tries to give an imaginary coherence and integrity or a fullness to some kind of real events that we're facing. What are we basically trying to do? We understand that real life is very messy. We understand that real life is very complicated, but we're still trying to simplify it. We're still trying to divide it or categorize it, organize it in some way, right? But we know that is not true. That is not a real expression of how things really are. Real expression, real things are messy and very complicated. That is not how things are. A guy and a girl, they just don't meet and fall in love, and then they fight over something and then get back together and marry and live happily ever after. It does not work that way, right? So, but we do that. So what is this called? Landau calls this a falsification of experience. Experience is how we live our lives, the reality of life, the real reality of life, which is complicated. But we falsify that experience by creating a unity out of that experience. Okay, so what he's basically saying is that because all these linear narratives that create a fixed kind of text, all these linear narratives that create a fixed kind of morality, these are basically false narratives. They are false. And hypertext, because it rejects linearity, it rejects this falsification of experience. It rejects this kind of experience which can be unified. Why? Because go back to our first lecture or our second lecture where I said that hypertext narratives are diverse. They cannot be categorized. They cannot be organized. He really stressed that point a lot, probably in the second section. The hypertext narratives cannot be organized into different sections because they're diverse, they're multi-directional, they're multilinear. Because of all these things, hypertext represent reality as it is, as it goes in multiple directions, as it creates all these multiple associations. Hypertext, because they're not unidirectional, because they're multidirectional, this is why hypertext actually represent the true reality of life, the true messiness, the true, distortion, the true disturbing events of life which overlap one another, which don't have any particular meaning, which are all gray and never black and white. So this is a very critical point to understand. Landau says that because hypertext rejects linearity, it rejects the falsification of experience, and thus non-linear narratives or hypertextual narratives, they are more real, they're more true because they actually represent our lives as they are. They are not at all amoral, right? They're not at all amoral because what is morality? Go back to the first thing that I said in this lecture. Morality is the social function of society. It is the expression of social thinking. So if we understand, if we take morality to be just the social function of society, if we don't try to unify morality, if we don't try to create a unified or coherent meaning, if we don't try to create like a closed set of meanings out of that society, that could also be morality for Landau. So morality for Landau is not something which needs to be unified. Morality for Landau can, in the same way that hypertext narratives are multilinear, morality can also be multilinear. It can have different levels. It can have different phases of existence. It can be different in one family. It can be different in one society. It can be different in one country. That is okay. Landau does not want us to run after unified meanings, because also he is a post-structuralist. Post-structuralists do not want a linear meaning. They do not want a fixed meaning. They want scattered meaning. They want meaning everywhere. Right. So in that sense, because the hypertextual narratives reject linearity, they reject the kind of false unity that is presented by these fixed narratives, the false singularity presented by these narratives. And in rejecting that kind of falsification of experience, they reject that kind of morality and create their own kind of morality. This is a very key point. Please don't ask me later if our hypertextual narratives amoral. They're not amoral. I've written it and I've underlined it for you. They're not amoral. They just have a very real, very true kind of morality. Okay, a morality which is the actual expression of society. Just maybe think about the way that you think. If you ever read a stream of consciousness narrative like Mrs. Dalloway, the prime example, or if you've ever actually just meditated or just heard yourself or just thought about yourself thinking, what you don't proceed, your thoughts don't proceed in a linear manner. You might have some task that you might have to do. The next thought might be about what you're going to have for lunch. The next thought might be oh, I should pay attention to ma'am when she's speaking, or the next thought might be oh, I don't understand any of this. So these thoughts are also not linear. That is just not how we think. Disunity, disorganization, is a way of life for us. Right, it's a way of life. The unity that we impose on our thoughts by categorizing them or by noting them down is an actual expression of imposing unity on something which is completely spread out. And this spread outness, this kind of disunity is what hypertextual narratives represent. Because they represent this, they give us a more truer, they give us more truer name, they give us a more true, more real, more interesting image of life. And therefore, for Landau, hypertext narratives are not amoral. They have their own kind of morality. Okay, so for example, if I give you an example, maybe you'll understand. He says that the rejection of linearity here is a rejection of the falsification of experience. That's what I'm telling you. Hypertext narratives reject linearity. They reject the falsification of experience. Will give the example of Tennyson, who wrote in the poetry of fragments. Or if you don't like Tennyson, or if you haven't read much, think Eliot. Eliot also wrote in fragmented poetry to write with greater honesty and greater truth. Why did Tennyson choose to write this? This is a quote directly from Tennyson. You'll find it on 225. That Tennyson wrote the poetry of fragments because he wanted to write with greater honesty. Okay, so this honesty is only present when you reject unity, when you reject linearity. Right. Non-linear narratives are thus more truthful, honest, thus real. rather than amoral. They have their own kind of morality, which is a real morality. Right. Modern pre-hyper. So I was talking about philosophy and literature. This is what he's going to say, that modern pre-hypertext narratives like history, philosophy, even literature, they also reject linearity through a rechronologization of narrative. What is a rechronologization? So what is a chronology? Must have heard of the Amit Shah meme which says chronology samjhiye. So what is chronology? Chronology is a following of events. You know that event one happens, then event two happens, then event three happens. So for example, Germany lost the First World War, right? This is the first event. The second event is that they were asked to pay a huge amount of taxes by the rest of the by rest of Europe. That is point number two. Germany retaliated by coming up with the Nazis and by creating the worst Holocaust ever. That is point number three. It's a chain of events. If number one had not happened, maybe number three would not have happened. Right, that's what historians say. That is how we usually see history, that 1900 was followed by 1901, or that the Age of Enlightenment was followed by Romanticism, Romanticism was followed by Victorianism, Victorianism by modernity. That is the chain of events. Now he says that in the post-structuralist era, we are slowly changing this. We are slowly coming at multilinear narratives. We're slowly coming at complex narratives. That is just a way. So he says that this is not only a literary movement; it is also a movement expressed in other narratives which are going against a linear notion of time. Right, rechronologization of narrative means going against a linear notion of time by expressing simultaneity. Simultaneity means, you know, two events happening at the same time, representing a struggle against the linearity of time. If you have time, go look up the terms heterochrony and space-time. These are terms given by Mikhail Bakhtin. So you will find a lot of work there. Okay, it's 12:23. I'm just going to speak for 2 minutes more. So Coover says that because we are reader authors, remember our previous discussions that hypertext narratives don't really have one author, every reader is also an author. So because there is a reader author and because there is no true single narrative, again we've talked about this so many times that when we both go into the hypertext, you and I, we will both have our different paths. There is no one single narrative in a hypertext. This he says, this is why he says that we have been brainwashed into accepting a single right narrative. We have been told that there is one narrative, okay, there is one meaning, and there is only one meaning that exists in a novel. But now, through hypertextual narratives, we know that this is not so, that there are multiple meanings which exist in a novel, and we can go look up all of these meanings. And you know, even then that narrative will have its own power. Even then, that narrative will completely exist, and that is okay. It will be fine, right? So this is where we're going to end this section. Right, and from tomorrow onwards, we're going to go in the beginning and ending section. Any questions that you have at this point? And I want you to read this section, it's very important, 225, especially pages 225 and 226. So read them. Any questions that you have? We have 5 minutes.
I have one.
Hara.
Taking into consideration the points about morality, reality, and linearity mentioned by Ma'am Landu, can we say that the hypertext have become entirely an platform where we can say that it depends entirely upon the user's capability to go and see the things?
Yes, that's a very good point. Very good point that you're making here. Because all readers are readers and authors, right? Therefore, the kind of morality that they choose to extract from the text. ठीक है वैसे तो we should not be extracting morality, because again if we extract morality, what we're doing is creating a unified meaning which is not okay, which goes against hypertext. But we can definitely say that the reader is faced with or is given the option to look at all these narratives and choose his or her own path through that. While choosing his or her own path, that person is creating their own moral way, their own version of truth. This is a statement, this is a phrase that you can use rather than saying that they are making their own morality. Write this down, that they're choosing their own version of truth by acknowledging and accepting, by acknowledging and accepting the fact that truth might have many different versions. So what you're saying is completely applicable. We can definitely say that. Any other thing, any other comment or any other statement that you might want to make? If this linearity thing is not clear, you can still speak up. Or if you don't want to speak up, you can chat. Right.
Ma'am, can we use also the same statement for
Okay.
defending that?
Rahul, you'll have to talk again. What did you say?
Ma'am, can we use the same statement again for defending ourselves that hypertext have becoming an explosion of knowledge?
Yeah, of course. You can definitely say the hypertexts are an explosion of knowledge. Why? Because they're so multilinear. Na? You cannot follow the same path through a hypertextual narrative twice. You will go through different paths. Therefore, that is what reality is. Right? So we always say na, ki there are two sides to every coin. Hypertextual narrative says that there are no two sides. There are multiple sides. Right? There are multiple infinite sides. So hypertexts are theoretically infinite, and therefore this explosion for knowledge is also infinite. Right. And I also, any other questions that you have? Okay. So also wanted to tell you that probably this week will be my last week with you guys. I have accepted a job at another college. So I'll be leaving the university soon.